Welcome back to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. I am your host, Bronin. Thank you for joining me. I've got a big show today. It is election week in Texas. The primary official election day is March 3rd, Tuesday. You may have already early voted, as I have. I'm going to talk about what I ultimately decided in terms of my vote. We're going to get into Trump's appearance in Corpus Cristi last week, and I'm really going to be honing in on the U.S. Senate Republican primary because Trump had an opportunity to endorse candidates on Friday during his visit, and his decision, I thought, was very telling. So we're going to get into that. I'm going to save the City Hall discussion for the next episode. There are going to be a couple more City Hall meetings. There's going to be an economic development meeting today, I believe, and then Mayor Johnson called a special meeting for Wednesday to specifically discuss the fate and next steps for Dallas City Hall. I don't think it's looking good for Dallas City Hall. If you haven't already, please check out my column at bronin.substack.com. I also tweeted it out at RTR_Bronin, RTR_Bronin. I think I really nailed it on what's going on with City Hall if you haven't checked out that column. And before the next episode, I'm sure I'm going to be tweeting about it at RTR_Bronin, live tweeting if I can during the meeting, or during the meetings, I should say. So we'll get to that later in the week. But before we jump into it, please make sure, if you haven't already, I would love if you like, subscribe, follow the Real Texas Radio Podcast from wherever you stream. All right, let's jump in. All right, now, you're listening to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Bronin, just a fed-up taxpayer bringing you all of your Texas, local, and national news. Okay, today in this segment, I'm really going to be focusing on the Republican primary contest for the United States Senate, which I think is, on both sides, and the Democrat primary as well, is probably the most watched election here in Texas. I will get into the Attorney General race as well. There are many competitive races around the state, and let's go ahead. I want to focus on really John Cornyn, the incumbent senator, and Ken Paxton, obviously the AG of Texas. There is a third candidate, Wesley Hunt, who is challenging, and considering he's just a freshman congressman who really came out of nowhere in some of the polls, if you follow the polls, that is, he's performing a lot better than you might expect. It's certainly looking like the U.S. Senate race on the Republican side is going to be moving into a runoff. That would be my prediction if I was going to make a prediction. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something right now. I voted probably on the third day of early voting. And I know that I was recommending that you take a primary ballot on the Democrat side, which is a strategy that I have followed for many years, including as a voter in Texas. But you know what? These races, they were really heating up on the Republican side. And I'm predicting there could be two runoffs. There could be a runoff for the AG race as well. And if I put myself into the Democrat primary, then I would not have been able to vote in those Republican runoffs for huge high-stakes offices. And I know the same argument could be made. Any of these Democrat races, for example, the District 33 race with frontrunners Julie Johnson and Colin Allred, they're running for the House of Representatives. That race could head into a runoff as well. There are two other candidates, and if they collectively are able to garner, 10 or 13% of the vote or something like that, then it could push the race into a runoff. But let's stay focused on the Republican side. I voted for John Cornyn. I absolutely voted for John Cornyn, and I know he has taken a reputational bashing as being the ultimate rhino. And you know what? I'm just going to ask you, make a list of 20 problems in politics or 20 problem politicians. Or you know what? Extend your list to 50. State, federal, local, municipal, whatever. Is John Cornyn in your top 20 or your top 50 in terms of problems? And, you know, I keep looking around. What's the evidence that he's a rhino? And there was a vote in 2022 that was on gun legislation, allegedly to tighten up the domestic abuser loophole in 2022. That, John Cornyn crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats on the most devastating gun legislation to pass in a generation. You know, 4 years later, just look around, look in the news, look at the DART light rail, look at all the transgenders. Does anybody have a problem getting a gun 4 years later after this allegedly Second Amendment trampling legislation passed that I certainly forgot about? You probably forgot about it too. And they're trying to pin I'm assuming the Ken Paxton camp, they're trying to pin H-1B visas to Cornyn. And you know what? Let me just tell you this. Look at the voting record. And John Cornyn has voted with Donald Trump approximately 97% of his voting record, which I believe, according to what I was looking up, is like a point ahead of Ted Cruz at 96% voting in alignment with Donald Trump. And you know what? I actually suspected Donald Trump. He was here in Corpus Cristi on Friday afternoon, and he was really giving one of his classic greatest hits rallies. He was talking about his performance at the State of the Union, and he did endorse some candidates on the stage. All of the Republican who's who was at Corpus Christi at this Trump event. Every candidate of consequence was there. And John Cornyn actually flew down on Air Force One from Washington, D.C. with Trump, as did Ted Cruz. Ken Paxton was in Corpus Christi as well. But let me just go ahead. I actually thought that Donald Trump was going to endorse John Cornyn. That actually was my prediction. Here is Donald Trump in Corpus Christi on Friday.
We'll stay in Washington for a little while longer. So thank you very much. And we have a great Attorney General, Ken Paxton. Where's Ken? Hi, Ken. Hi, Ken. And we have a great Senator, John Cornyn. Hi, John. Thank you, John. They're in a little race together. You know that, right? A little bit of a race. It's going to be an interesting one, right? They're both great people, too. Thank you both very much.
So there you have it. John Cornyn, who MAGA journalists and hardcore MAGA supporters, the MAGAverse, is stomping all over as a washed up, no good, turncoat, useless rhino, right? Well, there you have it. In Trump's own words, he just called John Cornyn a great senator, thanked him for all he does.
Biden is the worst thing that ever happened to old people.
Oh, that's right. That was another argument. We have to dispense with John Cornyn because he's too old. He's too old. He's 75, which means he's 5 or 6 years younger than Donald Trump, approximately. Actually, he might be 74. So we have to get rid of him because he's old. Well, he's a spring chicken compared to Donald Trump if we want to just look at the numbers. So I voted for John Cornyn, who, by the way, when he ran back in 2020, he beat the brakes off of the Democrat opponent, who you don't even remember her name, do you? I don't. I think she was an Air Force veteran. I think he beat her by about 1.5 million votes. And that was a big turnout year for Democrats, wasn't it? 2020. Big turnout year for Democrats. Ken Paxton, you know what? I'm just going to tell you this. I voted for him in his last cycle for Attorney General. Yes, I did. I saw George Bush, right? It was another George Bush on the ballot trying to get back into politics. And he was the top challenger on the Republican side going against Ken Paxton. And hell no, I wasn't going to vote for Bush for another Bush. I voted for Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton won by his widest margin when he ran for his third term, which, by the way, happened to be after most all of the scandals that have ensnared his career. They were already out in the public. The Nate Paul drama, and I believe even the affair drama might have been out in the public then. Maybe that wasn't totally public by that point, but certainly the Nate Paul drama, certainly the securities fraud, federal allegations, they had been hanging around for some time before his third term. So the public, you could argue, decided, they nullified any potential crime that he may have committed by re-electing him by their widest margin ever to a third term. But you know what? I'm going to tell you something. And so if it ends up so that Ken Paxton is the nominee for the general in November, I'm going to support him. If it's Wesley Hunt, who, by the way, Donald Trump also called out as a great friend, also called out that all three candidates running in the Republican U.S. Senate primary, they all got favorable remarks by Donald Trump. By the way, he did not endorse Ken Paxton. So if John Cornyn is so terrible and so anti-MAGA and such a problem for Republican politics, then why didn't Donald Trump endorse Ken Paxton? Why did Donald Trump allow John Cornyn to fly with him on Air Force One from D.C. to Texas right before the rally? Why was that allowed to happen? So I just want to put that question out there. If John Cornyn is so bad, and he was almost the majority leader, John Thune beat him out in the Senate. So let's get back to Ken Paxton. You know what I remember thinking? I don't think I talked about this on the show at the time, but I remember when Trump was reelected for the second term and he was deciding who he was going to put forth as a nominee to be the Attorney General of the United States. And you know whose name was conspicuously not in the mix, wasn't showing up in any of the articles, even the Republican bashing far left-wing media? I didn't see the name. Guess whose name I didn't see in the mix for Attorney General of the United States, who happens to be about the most pro-Trump Attorney General probably in the country? Ken Paxton. Did not see Ken Paxton's name in the mix for Attorney General of the United States. The most pro-Trump AG probably in the country, a third-term AG from Texas, where there would have been no problem if Trump was able to pull Ken Paxton into a federal cabinet position, and or if he was able to pull Ken Paxton into the DOJ, there would have been no problem backfilling the position here in Texas with a solid Republican, right? Do you think Ken Paxton would have been confirmed in the Senate? Do you think Ken Paxton would have been confirmed as Attorney General of the United States? Serious question. I don't think so. I absolutely don't think so. You know what would have been dragged up again? The impeachment trial would have been relitigated. The impeachment trial, which obviously Ken Paxton, he was acquitted back in September of 2023. But there were very damning allegations made by the witnesses, who, by the way, were Ken Paxton's top staff, his first deputies, his top lieutenants. In fact, here was one of the witnesses who he appeared second on the stand. And remember, this was not an ordinary trial. I think this was like the first time in 100 years in Texas where such a trial occurred. The Texas Senate served as the jury. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, not a lawyer, served as the judge. And some of the most brilliant lawyers, the best respected, the best paid, the power brokers, the movers and shakers in Texas, a lot of them Houston lawyers, were either defending or they were prosecuting Paxton. Here's Rusty Hardin, one of the Texas legends. He is examining The second witness, Ryan Taggart, who was one of the top lieutenants in Ken Paxton's office, he ended up whistleblowing. He went to the FBI. He accused Ken Paxton of abusing his office, of exerting astronomical political force and favor at the behest of one of his donors, Nate Paul, who donated at least $25,000 to Ken Paxton. Here we go.
Well, I don't think anyone would have ever accused me of being far left. In newspaper articles describing me leading up to this trial, I was described as working for an extreme conservative group. I believe I work for what I would call a Christian legal advocacy organization, but my politics are very much conservative. My party affiliation has been and always will be Republican, and I have long been associated with what I would call the conservative legal movement. That includes the Federalist Society, the Philadelphia Society, and of course the Blackstone Fellowship.
So if someone would refer to you as a rhino, what is your reaction?
That would be, that would be remarkable, and I can't imagine that having any basis in reality.
So Rusty Hardin, he asked all of his witnesses who were the whistleblowers. There were 7 of Ken Paxton's hand-picked top deputies and lieutenants, the most MAGA minds in the legal world that Ken Paxton could assemble, with a ton of Texas conservative street cred. And Rusty Hardin asked them all, "Are you a rhino?" And none of them are. I don't think they're lying about that. And fine, you want to argue they were just disgruntled employees and they were just trying to shake down the taxpayers. I think what was the settlement in the end, if there was one, $3 million among these 7 guys. These 7 top lawyers, they put themselves through reputational assassination. They put themselves before a firing squad to split a kitty of $3 million. All of these top legal minds. Is that what you're trying to tell me? And I was going back, I was rewatching the trial. It was like an 8-day trial. We received, as Texas citizens, an unprecedented view into what was going on at a state agency in Texas here, the AG's office. Here's Rusty Hardin again. I'm going to play another cut with Ryan Taggart.
The fact that he had invoked the use of a grand jury
Ken Paxton
to try to help Mr. Paul in his investigation, what level of concern and why was that a bother to you?
It was unconscionable in my view. You were using criminal process to pursue the private enemies.
Objection. I'm objecting to improper opinion about the unconscionability of these actions.
I asked why he was concerned.
Overruled.
Thank you. You can pick back up.
Yes, in my view, the criminal process had been harnessed to pursue the business enemies of an individual named Paul, who also happened to be under intensive investigation by law enforcement.
Yeah, I'll pause there. And that objection was by one of Ken Paxton's attorneys, who he was described as kind of a newer attorney at the time. I think it's Anthony Osso, last name Osso. Very good-looking guy.
Are you a homosexual?
Hey, sorry, guilty on that. But it was an extremely complicated case, the situation with Nate Paul. Nate Paul, just as a refresher, he was once this rising real estate mogul star in the Austin area. I think he's like 39 years old. He was described as this boy wonder, and he owned all of these fabulous, super desirable properties in Austin. And you know what? I was just looking up, where is Nate Paul? Where in the world is Nate Paul today? Well, just 2 weeks ago, he was laughed out of bankruptcy court. He tried to file bankruptcy. He owns the IHOP in Austin that's kind of right off of Rainey Street. And I actually know it. I've walked by it many times. I think the last time I stayed in Austin, it was at a hotel like right beside this IHOP. It's so conspicuous. And you just know it's like this piece of land that hasn't been developed yet. It's so ridiculous that that this property, which by the way, this property is described as potentially the most desirable piece of real estate in Travis County, not just Austin, but Travis County, the whole county. And Nate Paul owns this piece of land, not for much longer though, because he filed bankruptcy because he's being foreclosed upon. And he is in financial straits. He has been exposed really as a fraudster. And how the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, got involved in the situation is Nate Paul was under investigation, under federal investigation by the FBI. They had a very wide-reaching investigation. Oh, and by the way, when was this? When was this going on? 2020? Who was the president then in 2020? Donald Trump. Donald Trump's FBI. And you want to argue, we can certainly make the case here that Christopher Wray was Donald Trump's worst appointment. But hey, guess what? It was still Donald Trump's FBI and DOJ. And they were investigating this guy, Nate Paul. And according to witnesses, Ken Paxton was trying to get his top people in the office to basically engage in counter lawfare and be able to expose evidence and find out what the FBI was doing and then pass off the information to Nate Paul. And the other piece is Ken Paxton also wanted his top lieutenants or his first deputies to block discovery in a civil lawsuit between Nate Paul and a charity. He wanted them to block discovery, which that's what the witness there, Ryan Taggart, was saying was just insane, was completely unprecedented, completely inappropriate, and that the Attorney General's duty in engaging in any type of lawsuit is to protect the public, not get engaged on behalf of a donor. And so there were other ways that Paxton, he was essentially trying to interfere with or undercut the FBI investigation into a donor. There was other stuff going on as well, but every witness who got on the stand was super Republican, conservative, MAGA people, and they saw this Nate Paul guy, and they all tried to say to the Attorney General, hey, Ken, buddy, you hired me. You know, we support you. We love the mission. We're hardcore Texas, conservative. You got to get away from this guy, Nate Paul. This guy is bad news. He's going to sink you. And Ken Paxton, he just pressed forward. He pressed forward. The risk that he put himself in, the peril he put himself in his career, in his reputation. He was suspended from the office until that trial played out. He almost lost his career for this donor. And, you know, I don't have any evidence, so this is all speculation. I am completely just speculating here. I'm not saying that this is the case, but as I remember watching that trial, I watched most of it live. I was like, what does this Nate Paul guy have on Paxton? What kind of blackmail does Nate Paul have on Ken Paxton that Paxton would have exhausted all of his political capital, essentially, up until the time, and risked everything for this guy? It was really... It was just so suspicious. It was so dirty. The whole situation stank. So I bring all that up. And you know what? If you have some time, if you didn't watch that trial, I know it's a long trial. I'm not saying go back and rewatch the whole thing, but watch some of those witnesses. And it was very instructive, I think, of what was going on in the state. And you don't think that this can all be dragged up again and appear and play out again in the general election? Maybe not. I don't know. Ken Paxton versus Tallarico. Ken Paxton versus Jasmine Crockett. Like I said, I'm going to support, in all likelihood, the Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, whomever it is, in the general. But the trial, it's something that has always stuck with me, whenever I think of Ken Paxton, who I know he does plenty of good as well. I know he's a lawsuit machine. I know he's filed some very successful lawsuits, recovered damages for the state of Texas, high profile lawsuits. I'm not saying he doesn't do any good at all. I'm not saying that. But I'm just pointing out that Donald Trump is clearly aware of Ken Paxton's serious baggage. And Trump obviously has his own baggage. But Trump, he's in a different category. When you compare other politicians to Donald Trump, or you try to hold up Ken Paxton and say, well, it was the same thing. They were just trying to do to me what they did to Trump. They were trying to put him in jail. They were trying to impeach him. They were just trying to smear him with all of this fake news and phony allegations. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. And again, it was Trump's FBI who Ken Paxton's top people whistle blew to. It was Trump's FBI. So that's my 2 cents, and that's why I voted for Cornyn. That's one of the big reasons why I voted for Cornyn. Trump, now let's switch over. I want to talk about the AG race. There are 4 candidates in the race. Do you know who else Trump did not endorse? Well, he endorsed nobody in the primary for Attorney General on the Republican side. He certainly did not endorse Aaron Reitz, who Ken Paxton has endorsed. And I didn't vote for Aaron Reitz. He was working in the Trump DOJ, where he had to be confirmed, I believe, by a judiciary committee or subcommittee for a significant post. And he's a young guy. I think he's like 38. And he's another one who is branding himself as MAGA above MAGA. He can out MAGA anybody. Just ask him. You know what? I don't have a beef with the guy. I don't have a beef with any of the candidates in the U.S. Senate race or in the AG race in the Republican primary, by the way. But Trump did not endorse Aaron Reitz. He did, however, praise one of the candidates in the race who just last week after the State of the Union, there was a video circulating. I may have recirculated the video at RTR_Bronin. But Donald Trump, he gave praise to Chip Roy, the sitting congressman. Called him out in the race. Didn't endorse him. Didn't go as far as to endorse. But called him out. Acknowledged him as a good guy, as a friend in the race. And I would say Chip Roy is the front runner. I voted for Joan Huffman. Yes, I did, and I know. No, she is not the candidate out there with the bullhorn screaming MAGA, 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 Trump, Trump, Trump. But I happen to feel that she's the most experienced and qualified candidate for the role. She's been a prosecutor in Texas. She's been a judge in Texas. She's been a longtime legislator in Texas, and I think her voting record in the Texas Senate has been reliable. That's instructive as to how she would perform in the AG's office. She's got a lengthy record, and so I voted for her. I don't think she's going to win. I don't know if this goes to a runoff. I don't know that she would be in the runoff. Maybe.
Because it's good to be challenged. It's good. Being challenged is okay.
Yeah, good. I agree. Being challenged is okay. And I realize I'm expressing some contrary opinions here on the Real Texas Radio podcast, but hopefully that's why you tune in. And you know what? I didn't vote for Abbott either. I voted for Doc Pete Chambers, who I know is going down in flames. I know he's going to lose. I know he doesn't have any money, but you know what? I liked his direction on the property tax cuts, which Greg Abbott has now been promising for many years and has not delivered. But, this is going to be the term. The 4th term is going to be the charm. Well, he's got about $100 million, so he's one of the best funded candidates probably ever in the history of the United States. Certainly compared to gubernatorial races, certainly compared to other statewide races, he's very well funded. It could be a lot worse. And again, in the general, who am I going to vote for? Who did I vote for previously, I voted for Greg Abbott. So I'm going to continue that support in the general. But you know what? It's a primary, and you got to earn your position, in my opinion. You got to earn the vote. And I don't mind forcing some of these people to have to spend the money and pitch their vision to the voter if you want to get my vote. I got into the Republican primary because I also wanted to register a vote for the Republican who's running against Andy Summerman here in Dallas for the Dallas County Commissioner seat. Is he place 2 or 3, Andy Summerman? I'm not sure. There is no Republican representation at Dallas County. There is 0 Republican voice. So you know what happens in that situation? The Dallas County Commissioners, who they have control of all of Dallas County, the jails, the courts, public health. They control billions of dollars, the hospitals. They are approving contracts every meeting. They can easily be multi-million-dollar contracts. There's no debate. Nobody raises a question. Nobody raises an objection. They're all just voting in lockstep. Oh, and by the way, Andy Summerman, the big dope that he is, I played the cut on a recent episode. He was predicting, because they're also in charge of voting and making sure that elections go smoothly in the county. Andy Summerman was screaming like a schoolgirl about how unprepared the Republicans were in terms of staffing polling sites and what a quote-unquote disaster. It's going to be a disaster because of the Republicans who are going to just ruin the election. We've never seen anything like it. You know what? When I voted on day 3 of early voting in an extremely blue polling station that probably has 90% Democrat voters show up to it, I voted without any chaos, without waiting in line, without any problem. And the poll workers there, because they have separate Democrat poll workers, Republican poll workers, they were happy to see me. They were ready for me. They were prepared. It was fast and easy process. There were no problems. But we need an oppositional voice. You don't want to have 100% one-party rule, really, in any situation. You need somebody to play the watchdog. You need somebody to be calling out the BS, holding colleagues to account, adding the pressure, informing the public, no matter what the body is. You don't just want a bunch of yes men approving millions of dollars worth of contracts while they're raising your property taxes and while they're giving themselves raises and every county employee raises, which they are doing at Dallas County, by the way. So that was another reason why I wanted to get into the Republican primary. And I know that this candidate challenging Andy Summerman, I think it's Barry Warnick, that he's going to be on the general anyway. He may have a challenger. I forget now. I usually take in all my notes. I write down who I'm going to vote for, particularly when I'm trying to juggle however many races. There were competitive judicial races. I think Texas appellate court. Some of the people running on the Republican side, I don't think they've ever been judges, or they have very little experience practicing law. There were some other experienced candidates. So I wanted to make sure I registered votes for them as well. There were plenty of reasons. But the U.S. Senate race, that was really the number one reason why I wanted to get into the primary. AG probably number 2. As a matter of fact, I think this is probably a good place to wrap it up. I am going to be talking about, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the next episode, it's going to be a Dallas City Hall fate episode. We should have a lot of news. The primary election will have finished, and also the Dallas City Hall, they're meeting on March 4th to determine the fate of Dallas City Hall next step. So we'll be talking about that. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hanging in with me. And please make sure, again, like, subscribe, follow to the show, share it with a friend. Follow me on X at RTR_Bronin, RTR_Bronin, and I will catch you next time.